Hello and welcome to SUSECon Digital 2023. This is session tutorial 1098, deploying Rancher into Azure. My name is Dwayne Sims. I'm a sales engineer with SUSE in the Eastern US. I'm based in Raleigh, North Carolina. Be glad to hear from you later if you have any questions or need any other help with things. So we're going to take a look at overall what we're going to try to accomplish here today. We're going to look at how we would create a virtual machine to actually install Rancher on in Azure. We'll take a look at some of the networking pieces you need to change to make this work. We'll also take a look at installing K3S on top of this virtual machine so you can run Rancher on it. We'll also look at how you would install Rancher on top of the K3S that you just installed. We'll also look at the process of creating a cloud credential. And that'll take us through the whole process here. So what are we really trying to do? As I stopped and thought about how to present this, it's like, well, maybe we need a picture of what we're actually trying to accomplish here. So what I'm really trying to do is show you the way that you create the infrastructure to create the resources that you need to be able to run Rancher in Azure. And so the base resource that you need is a virtual machine to run it on. Of course, the virtual machine needs to have some version of Linux running on top of it, and then some kind of Kubernetes on top of that. So in my case, I used OpenSUSE Leap as the operating system to install on. And then I used the very lightweight K3S Kubernetes distribution by Rancher to actually as the basis of the Kubernetes that I need to run this on. Now, I'm going to also note here, I'm doing this as a demo. I probably would not do this in production. I would probably spread this out onto at least 3 virtual machines if I was going to be doing this in production. I wouldn't put it on a single one. Just not robust enough. Take this with a slight grain of salt here, but this is the basic process that you would go through to do that. Then once I've got Rancher installed, I now then can use Rancher to manage AKS clusters. I can use it to build AKS clusters. I can import already existing AKS clusters back into Rancher to manage them. I can also deploy virtual machines in Azure and then install Kubernetes distributions like RKE or RKE2 or K3S onto just standalone virtual machines. I've got that ability to do that as well. So, and then if I've got other Kubernetes distributions running, I can then import them back into Rancher as well. So you've got a lot of flexibility here with Rancher. I'm not going to go into a lot about Rancher in this presentation. There's lots of demos and there's lots of videos out there on how to do that. I'm just going to show you the basics of setting up the infrastructure to be able to run Rancher. So let's look at how we would build out that VM to be able to run Rancher on. There are many ways to do this. The 2 ways that are most common would be to use the AZ command line process to do this, and there are some methodologies set up to be able to do that. I'm not going to concentrate on that today. I'm going to be looking at using the Azure portal, which is the way probably most people would do this, especially the first time. They would probably use the Azure portal to actually set this up and use the graphical method of going in and clicking on the icons and building it out that way and filling out the forms. And that's a process I'm going to concentrate on here for this presentation. You could probably do this with Terraform too, and that would probably be a lot of fun. But that's really out of the scope of this presentation, so we won't be looking at that today. So let's go take a look at the Azure portal and see what we need to do to create this virtual machine that we need. Well, the very first thing you need to do is not create a virtual machine, but you need a resource group to actually build it out in. So we would actually go in and actually create a resource group. In my case, I gave it a name of Dwayne_RG. That's the resource group that I'm actually sticking this in. So all of the resources I'm going to be using to build out this Rancher virtual machine I'm going to wind up in this domain resource group. So that's just note the name that you create, and then be able to use that later. Now we go into actually clicking on the virtual machine button, and now building out the virtual machine. As you go through this process, you need to give your VM a name. You use that resource group that you just created. You've got to pick out an OS image. In my case here, I use OpenSUSE Elite 15.3. Probably today, if I did this, I would use 15.4. 15.5 will be out anytime, any day now. So probably by the time you see this, OpenSUSE Elite 15.5 will be out. You could also use SLE 15 SP3 or 4. That would be a good choice as well. And SP5 is due out very soon as well. So those would be good choices. Then you need to pick your VM size. You actually say what size of machine you want to run this on. Now, for my demo purposes, this standard B2MS is just fine. It gives me 2 CPUs and 8 gigabytes of memory. And again, it costs $60.74 a month to run, which is a little more than I would want to mess with most of the time. But again, I'm not going to leave it running all the time in my case, so it's probably not that bad. Then you want to pick out pick out an SSH key pair that you want to use, and just make note of which one you actually picked. That's an important thing because you'll need that later when you actually come back to your machine. Finish out setting up the virtual machine. Pick out disks that you need to use for this. I just use standard SSDs. They seem fine. I would stay away from spinning disks. Probably not fast enough for Kubernetes. So I would avoid those. But I don't think you need anything too exotic. Just standard SSDs should be fine. Also in networking, let it go ahead and create an IP for you. That should be just fine. Also, either pick an existing network security group that you've already been using, or have it create a new one. That's fine. If you have it create a new one, make sure you note the name of it, because you're going to need it later. We're going to need to make some modifications to this, and so you'll need to go back in and open up some ports on that. If you lose the name, it's kind of hard to get back. I had to live through that, so I can attest to the fact, don't try not to lose that name as you go through this process. And then click on review and create. That will create your virtual machine. You'll have it all ready to go at that point. Now let's go into the rest of the networking setup. Again, as I mentioned before, I'm going to assume you recall the name of your network security group and you made a note of it, like we just talked about. If you didn't, there's a process you can go through to figure that out. Ping me offline, and I'll go in. I'll send you the instructions on how you can figure that out. I'm not going to try to go into that right now. If I did, this presentation would be like twice as long as it already is, and I would probably be in all kinds of trouble. So let's not. We won't go there today. From that main icon bar, click on that network security group. That's the thing with the shield right here. That's what you want to go into to make these modifications. Now you should see your network security groups listed. Again, my network security groups are right here, and you can see that they're available. I use this one right here, this Barney NSG. That's the one I actually wound up using for this. Once you dig into here, you're going to notice that the only port that's open on this is port 22, which is SSH. And you need several others to make Rancher accessible from the outside. You could go ahead and install Rancher this way. You just wouldn't be able to get access to it. And that would be less than optimal for sure. So you want to click on the inbound security rules over on the left-hand side, because that's what we're going to be modifying here on this network security group. What we need to do is we need to open up ports to allow traffic on 443, 2379, 6443, 10250, and 10254. We need to open those up one at a time and add the ports in. You add your inbound security rules for each one of these ports, and you do have to add them one at a time. This is probably a case where using the command line is probably a little better because you can do them all in one fell swoop. But it's one time. it's probably not that big of a deal because you're not going to be doing this every day. So you just have to open them up one time and you're ready to go. And then once you finish up editing your network security group, you get a nice table to look at. And then you can see I've got this open for HTTPS, etcd, API server, kubelet, and health C. And so those are the ports you need to be able to reach to actually make your rancher configuration work properly. Optionally, you can also add a DNS name for the IP address that you created before. And that's what I would do, and that's what I did in my case. And the way you do that is you click on configure. That's right here under networking. And by DNS name, you click configure. And then you can actually go and give it a name. And that makes it much easier to reach this thing. At least to me. I know some people don't mind typing in IP addresses all the time, and you can certainly do that. There's really no problem in doing that if you want to, but I would rather have a name. So in my case, I actually use Barney as the name, like the dinosaur, the purple dinosaur that the kids used to watch. That's the name that I wound up using for this configuration. And then once that's done, you click save. And then you get this name right here. You get this DNS name. In my case, it was Barney East US Cloud App Azure.com. And that's the URL then I would use to reach Rancher once I've got it installed. And that makes it, to me, it makes it a lot simpler, and I would rather do it that way. Now we're into the process of installing K3S. Rancher runs as a containerized application on top of Kubernetes. I can't just install Rancher on top of Linux. I have to have a Kubernetes distribution running to install Rancher on. And K3S is a perfect choice in this case because it's a super lightweight Kubernetes distribution. It runs really well on a single node. I've got it running here at my home office on a Raspberry Pi, and it's been running there for a long time. So it's Kubernetes is the K3S distribution of Kubernetes is a perfect thing for running on single nodes. And in my case here, then I'd use that PIM file that we referenced before. I just make sure I've got that in .ssh on my own local system. And then I go from here on my local system, and I can then log into my virtual machine that I just created. And again, I can use the key pair that I created or that I used actually in creation of my virtual machine. I would reference that right there with the SSH command, and then that name that I just created. I also would use that Azure user that we referenced before. That's the username I'm going to log in as. And then I get logged in and I'm ready to go. Then I actually pretty much at this point, I'm using the Rancher docs to install K3S. It's pretty simple. I just use the curl command and I'm piping the shell on that machine and passing it the name of the node. And again, I'm going to reference that name of that node that I created, the DNS name that I created back in the previous step to be able to get K3S running correctly here. Simple one-line command. And then at this point, I'm ready to install Rancher. I am not today going to go into installing Rancher. There are lots of videos and tutorials on installing Rancher out there. Pretty much at this point, it's follow the docs. It's a pretty simple process. Again, what you probably want to do is, since K3S normally leaves the config file that you're going to need to actually get kubectl access and Helm access to your K3S that's running on that virtual machine we just created, you're probably going to need to grab that and drop it in your .cube folder under your login. You can now use kubectl and Helm to actually install Rancher. Just follow the docs. I referenced them right here. If you go to Rancher, www.rancher.com/docs, you'll find them there as well. But just follow the documentation at this point, and then you can install Rancher on top of K3S running in your node. The last piece that we need to take a look at is building out a cloud credential. What's the cloud credential for? What are we going to use that for? Well, you click on subscriptions. That's the key icon that's here on the main portal page. Then you can actually get your subscription ID. Now I've blanked some of mine out. I don't want everybody seeing that that might get a hold of this. So I blanked most of it out. But you grab that subscription ID, make a copy of it somewhere that you can get to it easy because we're going to need it in the next step. We then bring up the Azure CLI. Believe the best way to do that is to up here in the main portal. You can get in and actually get to the Azure CLI at this point. The basic command for this is we're going to create this service principal. This is actually the format of the command. I'll show you how I did it. So I dropped in the name that I wanted to use. In my case, I used the name Fluffy Butt. That was the name of a chicken we used to own. She's was killed last summer by a raccoon, so she's not here with us anymore. But anyway, that's the name that I used at the time. The you basically put in the scopes, and under subscriptions you use that ID that we had just grabbed. Now, once you run this command, once you run this, it's going to give you some output down here. And again, I've blanked out a bunch of this output. So again, I just don't want it floating around. But you need to save that output, because once you go into Rancher, you're going to use this information to create your cloud credential. That's where you actually get this information from. You want to save this because once it disappears off your screen, you can't get it back again. So you want to take and grab this, drop it into a text editor, save it as a file on your laptop, give it some obscure name that you'll remember later, so that you can get a hold of this information when you get back into Rancher to create your cloud credential. So just want to wrap up here a little bit at this point. You now would go ahead and go into Rancher and use Rancher to create that cloud credential. And now you can use Rancher to create your Kubernetes clusters. You can use it to build Azure VMs or AKS VMs that you need to, that you might want to run RKE or RKE2 or K3S on. You can use it to import other Kubernetes clusters that might be running in Azure. And as we always say around here, have a lot of fun with this. Thank you very much.